Thank you.
Yeah,
Hello and welcome to RBCM at Home. My name is Kim Goff and I'm a learning program developer at the Royal BC Museum. I'm coming to you today from my home, which is located on the territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, the Lekwungen-speaking people in Victoria, British Columbia. RBCM at Home started in March when our museum and archive closed due to the pandemic. It was an opportunity to talk to staff about what they were working on from home. Now that some of us are back at the museum, this is an opportunity to reach out to folks around BC about how they can continue to engage with us from their homes. Today, we have a special program with two archivists to talk about Indigenous genealogy and the different resources that are available at their institutions. Suzanne Salzberger is a reference archivist and ATIP analyst at the Library and Archives of Canada. Genevieve Weber is an archivist at the BC Archives, where she specializes in working with Indigenous communities from all over the province, assisting with research requests, providing access to records, and facilitating workshops such as this one. Thank you both so much for being here. Let's get started with you, Genevieve, and with the archives and what folks may find at the BC Archives.
Great, thank you so much, Kim. I'm just gonna switch my screen so that everyone can see my slides. And give me 1 second to get it started. Okay, so thanks again. As Kim mentioned, I work at the BC Archives, and I'm going to really do my best to keep this short, but it's tough because this is a topic that I think I could speak for an hour and a half on easily. There's so many resources and it's so wonderful to be able to share them with you. I wanted to start by acknowledging that I live, work, and play on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen and the Saanich people in Greater Victoria, BC. And I feel really honored and privileged to be able to do so. It's living here and being able to be a guest on this land has really helped me survive being at home during the pandemic. So I do feel very privileged. We often do genealogy workshops at the BC Archives, and there's so many different resources, but I do want to start by acknowledging that, first of all, wherever you are in your genealogy journey, hopefully you'll get something out of this workshop. We're going to do a very brief introduction to all the different types of resources that we have, some of which are great for beginners just starting out on their family history research, and others if you're sort of further along and want to get more in depth into it. Anything that you see today, if I rush through it too much or you want more information, you can always email me directly or email our general email address, which is on our website. Please do contact us. We're happy to help with any of your research requests. So for new genealogists, new family history researchers, we usually start by telling people to get as much information as you can before you get started. Now in the BC Archives, the material that we have all relates to British Columbia. So what we often refer to as the event, like a birth, marriage, or death, has to have happened in British Columbia for it to be in our archives. But there's plenty of other resources, including the ones that Suzanne will share with you afterwards, that spread beyond our borders. One of the sort of sad parts about doing family history research is that often the ways that you'll find out about your family or your community are not always because of happy events that took place. So there are events that leave a paper trail that will help you find out more about your family in the archives, and they're usually things like divorce or institutionalization. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the resources. The top 10 record types that we have in our archives really cover so many different areas, and people always think of vital statistics records first, and that's why we decided to start with me and then go on to Suzanne, because we have a vital events database, which is usually where people start their family history research, but there's so much more than that. And I'll only briefly touch on these today. I decided to keep all of my slides for them so that if people go back and rewatch the video after, they'll be able to pause on slides if there's something that they're interested in. But for today, I'll be mostly focusing on vital statistics records and some of the other really unique and interesting records that we have in the BC Archives that you wouldn't be able to find elsewhere. On our website, we have a page dedicated to family history that includes a number of links. that will help you further your research. I want to make sure I point out the last link on the page there, which is our video that we made, a short documentary. It's about 11 minutes long, called What's Your Story? We filmed it with Dr. Evan Adams, who's the head of the First Nations Health Authority, and he has done a lot of family history research in the past, and we followed him on his family history journey and talked about what it's like for him as an Indigenous person to do research into his community and family, and some of the successes and frustrations that he's had along the way. It's a beautiful video. Even though he was also a star in Smoke Signals, I don't think he was just acting in it. I think it was he was really moved by his journey. So starting with the genealogy database, at the end today, if we have time, I will go through and do some live searches, but for today I've kept to screenshots in the interest of time. This I think will help me move along a little bit faster. Otherwise I get too caught up in trying to do exciting and interesting searches, and it could take me hours to do it. The genealogy database is a specific database that just houses vital events records. So again, vital events records are records recording births, marriages, and deaths. You'll notice that we also have a spot here that lists baptisms. The BC archives, the BC government doesn't officially record baptisms. Churches, of course, do. The baptismal records that we have is as part of a big project. But it's incomplete. So I just want to make sure that people should not expect for sure to find a baptismal record. If they do, it's because that was from one of the churches that we worked with. If it's not there, if you're looking for a baptismal record, in most cases it will be in the archives of that church organization. So diocesan records, so if you were baptized in a Catholic church, it might be with the diocese records. If you were baptized in the United Church or the Anglican Church or another denomination, it could be with their centralized archives, or it could be at the church itself. So you might have luck finding information here, but there's a good chance that you would have to go to the church for that information. The records that are kept in this database really start from 1872. We have a handful of things from prior to 1872, which is when BC joined Confederation. But prior to that, again, although we do have some, don't be surprised if you don't find things from earlier. You may have to go to the churches for those. And that includes births and deaths and marriages, as well as baptisms for prior to 1872. Some vital events were not recorded. Some government agents just weren't very good record keepers. So there are gaps, and there are significant gaps in Indigenous record keeping. And that, to be very honest, is because the legislation was extremely racist and was designed to erase Indigenous people and not recognize them as people in BC. So there were specific time periods where Indigenous people were excluded from this type of record keeping. And that is 1872 to 1877 and 1899 to 1916. So those gaps can be incredibly frustrating, to say the least. We do have some workarounds that might help with it, but in many cases, we really have to use our imagination and try and think outside the box to figure out where the family record is missing at that point. Here's an example of doing a search. So with this database, I always recommend to start with as little information as possible. And then if you get 400 results, then add a bit more. The reason for that is that this database is very exact. So if you put in something that isn't included in the database, it just won't come up with any hits whatsoever. It's not very flexible. My biggest takeaway, if you take away nothing else for doing a search on this database, is to put asterisks, like I've done, around the first name. This means that the database will search in both the first name spot and the middle name spot. Oftentimes people went by their middle name, or we weren't sure which name was the first name and it got recorded the wrong way. So this will make your search much more successful. The name I've put in this example is my great-grandmother's name. When you see a list of results, it will look like this. You'll notice a few things on here. It tells you what the event type is. This is a marriage registration, and it has a registration number. It also has a microfilm number. If it didn't have an image attached, you could use that microfilm number to either come in person to see the record, That's a little difficult right now because although we are welcoming researchers on site, it's on an appointment basis and there's a priority list of research topics. But you can email us in and you can say, I want a copy of this record, and you'll get a digitized copy of the record. So if there isn't already a digital version, you can certainly order one. That's fairly straightforward to do.
Genevieve,
yes.
Genevieve, before you leave this page, can you just highlight with your cursor what number or information they would send to you to get a copy of that record?
Yes. The best would be to, if you can, to send this actual page, the actual result page, and then list the number here, the microfilm number. But if you can't send a copy of the page, then the registration number and the microfilm number will be really helpful. That'll allow our staff to look up the right microfilm, and then they'll have the registration number, which helps them find the record on that microfilm. But if you're lucky enough to have a JPEG attached down here, then you can open up the registration on your screen. And you can save this for your own use. You can save it to your computer. On a PC, you can right click and save it. You can print it. So this is for your own records. You can use this now. Marriage registrations are wonderful because if you find one, you've started with one name and then you end up with 6 names, because marriage registrations include the parents' names of the 2 parties involved, usually. So those are really, really great to find. One thing I forgot to mention, if you're just starting out on doing family history, bear in mind that you probably, depending on your age, you probably won't find records of your parents. You might find records of your grandparents, but you want to be thinking more like great-grandparents. And the reason for that is that records come to us on a regularly scheduled basis, but these records are considered active records for the lifetime of the people involved. So we don't get birth records until over 100 years after the person was born. We don't get marriage records for 75 years, and we don't get death records for 40 years. I always forget if it's 20 or 40. I think it's 40. It says on our database. So there is a time lapse between the event happening and the record coming to us. Now, specifically, as I mentioned, because there was racist legislation around the recording of Indigenous information, there's a number of other things that we usually ask people to do when they're doing research to try and make their search a little more successful. In terms of names, the spelling of Indigenous names was not consistent, so I always encourage researchers to think outside the box, try and come up with any imaginative way that your relative's name might have been spelled, try out lots of different spellings. Also bear in mind that at a certain point, and this again depended on the government agent, that often they would replace Indigenous names with European names. But if they only had a single European name that they would use, they would fill in the spot with the word unknown. So it would often come up as Mary Unknown, because there wasn't a surname that they would put in. In some marriage registrations, when there was no surname, they would put the father's first name as the surname. So this, when you first encounter this can be confusing, but once you realize that pattern, it can help to find other people as you go back in the generations to recognize that a surname may have been a first name at some point. And then the biggest advice that I often use when I'm helping researchers is to search by community name. And I have some examples of this. But if you search by a place name and look through all the records from that place or for a certain time period, there's a good chance that you'll find relatives, because sometimes you can recognize a name when you see it spelled, but you never would have considered spelling it that way yourself. So I've had a lot of success with researchers in searching by place as opposed to person. Here's a few examples of how hits will look when you get a list of hits after you've done a search. So the top one, in some cases, instead of having unknown, you see a lot of people whose first name is Old. So their nickname, they were always called Old Jim, and they would actually put that into the record as their full name. So there's some unusual names like that. And again, sometimes that can be hard to find in a search if you're searching for Jim in the first name spot. But when you're doing a community list, search by community, you might find that and realize, oh, these dates fit. This is probably the Jim that I'm looking for. And then the bottom one is an example of a record where somebody's surname is listed as unknown. I have a couple examples of what marriage certificates looked like over time. And I realize I'm using up a lot of time already. I'm going to try and skip through this quite quickly. Here's one, and then later they looked more like this. There's a lot of information in these. You can see that they list the trade or profession of the bride and groom, so that can be really interesting. It does list band affiliation, which may or may not be correct, but can be helpful in looking back through records and trying to trace family history. So I want to make sure I talk about some of the other exciting records that we have. We have some really interesting ones. This is our main database, so we have more than one database. Our main database contains all the other records that we have, so government records and records of families and individuals. You can do a search. I recommend watching this little video. It's only a few minutes long, and it helps you to understand how to use this database and to do a search on this. You can search by a relative's name or community. But a couple of the record types I wanted to share with you include the Pioneer Medallion application forms. These, somewhat ironically, this was a program when BC was celebrating the Confederation of Canada, and then a few years later, the celebration of BC joining Confederation. It had this program where it was recognizing people who had lived in the province for a long time as pioneers. Of course, that's a little strange to say about Indigenous people, but I like to think that the volunteers who were collecting these applications were maybe a little tongue-in-cheek when they would go into Indigenous communities and collect this information. They're wonderful application forms because they include an incredible amount of family information, or they can, not all of them do, but they can. And one of the things that they do, which is great, is they include siblings' names. I'm going to zoom in on this one in a minute. So you can see that it lists, so the person's name on this was listed up above. Interestingly, it lists her Indigenous name, so that's really useful as well. It would not necessarily have listed that in her official government records. It lists her parents' names, her siblings' names, and then they have this wonderful spot that sometimes has really moving commentary about the family history or who the person was and what they did. And I love this one because it simply says that she made beautiful moccasins. This is one of my favorite records to share because our former head of the Indigenous Collections Department, when she first joined, I brought out records from her home community of Masset on Haida Gwaii, and I chose this one as an example, and it turned out that it was her grandmother's record, which I hadn't known ahead of time. We have a large selection of oral history recordings, and so this particular one, Imbert Orchard, worked for the CBC. We have over 2,600 recordings. He recorded people from all over BC, but he recorded a large number of Indigenous people talking about their home communities and their families and their lives and their professions and trades. So that can be a really wonderful resource if you were lucky enough to have a family member or community member who was recorded in these recordings. Oh, now I seem to be stuck and I can't move on to the next slide. Uh-oh, I'm frozen. Oh, there we go. This is another example of oral history recordings. There are so many records in the BC archives, so I can't go through all of them right now. I know I've got about 2 minutes left. I'm going to try and race through the rest of them. But this is one example. The McKenna-McBride Commission includes photographs and transcriptions of interviews made with leaders in communities all over the province. The commission was working to establish the reserve system, essentially shrink all of the reserve land into what we recognize today as the existing reserve system in BC. But the records include wonderful testimony of community members. So again, if you're tracing back your family and looking at more broadly into the community, this is a great resource. I'm not going to talk about census records because Suzanne will, but I'm into the top 10 list. I'm going to really quickly breeze through these. Court records. You'll notice that a lot of records that I mention or that come up in this list have restrictions on them. That doesn't mean that you can't access them. I want to make that really, really clear. You can access them. It means that they're subject to legislation such as the Protection of Privacy Act. And what that does is it protects people who are living today and their family members who might have private information that they don't want shared that could cause harm to them. So if you were looking into some court records about your relative, there's a good chance that we would review it, and an archivist would make some redactions of any third-party information. So there's a good chance that the information you're interested in could be shared, but that other information might have to be blocked or removed from it before it's shared. And there's time periods on that. Really, generally speaking, things over 100 years old are usually open. That's not always the case, but for the most part, older records are open. Newer records, you need to make an FOI request to get copies of the records. These are just some fun pictures. Police and prison records, same idea. Coroner's records are wonderful examples of, they're not wonderful, they're often very sad because usually somebody has died in suspicious circumstances, but they can be incredible treasure troves of information. When we were making the film with Evan Adams, he looked into a coroner's inquest about a relative who had died from red tide poisoning. He was on a big fishing trip with lots of relatives, and the thing that was so interesting for him is that they interviewed each of the other people on the fishing trip, and they gave testimony describing who they were, what their relationship was to the person who had died. They often talked about their family and their community and their trades. So he was able to gather an immense amount of information about his family from this one record. He did have to ask for permission to get it, but we were able to make the entire record open to him. So it can be a great source of information. These are the photos. Everything that I'm showing you on here are ones that are over 100 years old and completely open. Lands records, such as Crown lands records and settlement scheme records. If you have a non-Indigenous relative in the past, there's a good chance that they purchased land or settled on land through one of these schemes. Institutional case files, the main body of records that we have in this subject area are from Riverview or Essendale, the mental health hospitals in BC. And again, those can contain a lot of personal information about a family. And I'm nearly at the end of my list, I promise. Oh, it's not going forward again. Keeps freezing up on me. Sorry, Suzanne, I won't cut too much into your time here. I'll skip through. This is the last set of records from BC I wanted to mention, and then I'll just briefly mention my colleagues in the museum. Colonial records often contain names of Indigenous people that the government officials in the colonies were in touch with. This is a photo from the Vancouver Island Treaties, or the Douglas Treaties. They're scanned and online. If you're part of a Douglas Treaty community, you can go online and you can see the names of the signatories. So we often have people from those communities wanting to look at the signatories' names and trace back, as they're tracing back their family, to a very specific community. Of course, with modern day reserve system, many communities that were quite separate in colonial times have been lumped together. So people are looking to trace back specifically which community they were from traditionally. And following names is one way to do that. We have a library collection, which I'll skip through. So one of my colleagues is here online watching, Brian, and he works in the Indigenous Collections Department of the museum. We work really closely with that department. So when we have researchers coming in to do family history, we encourage them to get in touch with the Indigenous Collections Department. They have a huge amount of material. Their website is really interesting, and you can read about it there. This is taken from their website. They have family belongings, objects, audio-visual material, so films and photographs and sound recordings, and an archaeological collection. And I'm not sure how things are going. You know, the pandemic has thrown everybody for a loop, but in regular times, you can book a meeting to go and go behind the scenes and see some of the belongings from your community. So I recommend getting in touch with them. And Brian is around if there's questions specific to their collections as well. And finally, the Learning Portal. I have a link to this in our document. The Learning Portal is a wonderful way to learn more about records. And this is a digital learning site run through the museum. Liz, who's online as well, manages that, and they have a whole section. There's a whole section on finding family. So I recommend you go and play around with that, and you'll probably get lost and have lots of fun looking at all the great stuff on there.
Thank you, Genevieve. Maybe we'll leave that screen. If you could just go back to that screen with your contact information. Let's just leave that up for a second if people want to write or jot something down. We are recording this, and today's session is a little bit longer than previous sessions. So if you were only anticipating half an hour and you have to go, don't worry, we're recording this. You can find it on the Royal BC Museum's YouTube channel, so you can come back and finish, or you can go back, look at some of those slides more closely and pause them. And get the information you want. Great, we'll get you to stop sharing there, Genevieve. I have 2 questions for you before we go over to Suzanne. And Suzanne, maybe some of these questions will relate to you as well. So if you've got input on them, please join in. The first question is from Rhoda, who's watching on Facebook. First, a comment. She commented that death certificates were available after 20 years of the death.
I don't know why I always get that wrong.
That number just blocked for you there. So thank you,
Yeah.
Rhoda. But Rhoda has been trying to find out what happened to her great-grandfather. She found him in the 1911 census, but not in the 1921 census, and she can't find a death certificate. Any quick tips come to mind on why that might be or what she might be able to do?
Well, that suggests to me that he possibly didn't die in BC, but if she's convinced that he did, then Suzanne might have thoughts on that. But if he's not showing up in the census and he doesn't have a death certificate, it's possible that he traveled out of the province and actually died somewhere else. And there are other databases that are international that she could search on and see if she could find it there. Although it sounds like if she's been doing family research, I imagine she might have tried that already. Suzanne, do you have any thoughts on that?
I too was going to say that more than likely they weren't in the province at the time they passed. But I have seen death certificates that say died overseas. Do you have those in your databases? I've seen that somewhere, and do you think I can remember where?
I think the only case that we have those are when they're serving in the military.
Okay.
Otherwise, you know, we have examples of people who are not from BC who died here, and we have their death certificate, like Errol Flynn, the famous actor.
Yeah.
He was not from BC, but he was on vacation here, and we have his death certificate here because they have to record it in the state or province where the event occurred. So, you know, that person could even have been just on a trip outside of the province. And if they passed away outside of the provincial borders, then we wouldn't have that.
1911 is a good indicator. It might have been, maybe there's a military record she could follow up on to see if he was in the military.
Yeah, and Suzanne will talk about that a little bit more, I think.
The second question, it does relate to both of you. It's from Melissa. She's wondering, is there a fee for archive staff to look up and to send a record? And is there a limit to how many people per day can, I guess she's wondering about being in the archives in person.
So at the BC Archives, under regular circumstances, if you can come into the archives, it's free to access material, and everything that is on microfilm you can scan for free and take it home on a memory stick. We don't charge, we waive processing fees for Indigenous researchers. So if you self-identify as Indigenous, when you ask for a scan or a copy of a record, then the fee will be waived. For non-Indigenous researchers, the fees are for offsite copies. I think it's 30 cents a page. There might be an initial fee. I can't remember off the top of my head. Things have been sort of a bit different recently because of the unusual circumstances. But you can email in, and if you know exactly what record it is, then that makes it a lot easier. So if you've done the research ahead of time, then it's really simple for the staff to find the record and make a copy for you.
And for Library and Archives Canada, in Vancouver, we only have the records of Department of Indian Affairs that were created in BC and the Yukon. So all the other records are in Ottawa. So yes, there is a charge to copy the record. If you, what you can do is request, it's called an ATIP request. So it's an access request to documents, and you must be quite specific in what you're looking for. Then an archivist will look for that record. If the record is in a file, they'll flag it, and it can be copied from there. So it just really depends on what you're looking for. If it's kind of vague and you want someone to do research for you, I think the archivists have about 2 hours that they can spend on research for a client. So it really depends on how specific you can be with your question. But yes, there is a charge. And I believe the same applies for Indigenous records. It just depends on how much research we need to do on finding the record. And that's the big, because we got a lot of records. So depending on where we're going to find it, you know, in which record.
Thank you, that helps. Now we're going to come over to Suzanne to find more about Library and Archives Canada, but just as we're making that transition, again, Rhoda, who's watching on Facebook, she says, Genevieve, that the marriage certificate you showed is her great-grandmother.
I just saw that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to comment on it. This happens to me every time I do a genealogy presentation. I pick new records every time, and there is always a relative in the audience.
Wow.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
I just think it's amazing.
Very neat. So thank you. Thanks, Genevieve. Suzanne, I think you've got some slides you're going to share with us as well.
I do. Let me just set up my share screen.
And again, if folks have questions during the presentation, you can use the Q&A window, or if the chat's easier, you can put them in there. And I will probably give Suzanne a chance to see if she's going to cover it during her presentation, save those questions and bring them to her at the end. So thank you, Suzanne.
All right, sounds good. Well, welcome to Indigenous Genealogy at Library and Archives Canada. Like Genevieve, we've got a lot of records and a lot of resources. So this is going to be a very brief overview of all of that. And if you take one thing away from this presentation, it's how to get in contact with us. And we can certainly help you navigate our databases, because it can be a little confusing. So, and my acknowledgement is I'd like to share that we are Library and Archives Canada, as well as my home, is located on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. About LAC. Library and Archives Canada, also known as LAC, holds the records of government departments, and our primary goal is to preserve and make available the documentary heritage of Canada. As you are aware, the Canadian government has an extensive history with Indigenous peoples. So because of the documentation of that history, there are some sources that have information relevant to genealogy. Terms. So when we are saying Indigenous, we are talking about First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation. First Nations people include both status and non-status Indians. The vast majority of our sources would pertain to those who were considered status. Métis Nation, for our purpose, are considered those families originally from the Red River settlement and Rupert's Land. Inuit are the Indigenous people of the Arctic, and the word Inuit means the people. The Inuit language of Inuktitut, I think I said that right, and the singular of Inuit is Inuk. Some terminology. Terminology has changed over the years. Records reflect the terminology that used at the time, which reflect the historical attitudes that are considered offensive today. You'll hear me use some terms when talking about the records because they are the terms used in the records. One note, however, is the word Indian. We don't use Indian to refer to First Nations, but you will hear us use status and non-status Indian. when referring to status, this is the legal term, which is why it's still in use. I'm sorry, I've just covered that, but here we are, getting to our website. And it's pretty easy. All you have to do is Google Library and Archives Canada. We have two ways to search for records. On the left, you'll see collection search, and that will search all the databases in our collection. However, some of the genealogy databases haven't gotten connected yet. So the alternative search for genealogy purposes is if you go to search the collection, which is the dark blue tab highlighted on the right, and go to ancestor search. And on that page, you'll see all the databases connected to genealogy. And there's much more than what you see there. It's just a short screenshot. So it goes, it's a long list. Vital statistics, of course, we have heard. I learned so much from you, Genevieve, from about the vital statistics that are in the provincial archives. And it's what we recommend to people who are starting their search as well, because it's just so loaded with information, and you get relatives and the informant and where they lived. It's just one of the best ways to start your genealogy research. The church records, again, we don't have any church records, but we do have very limited vital statistics. So I wouldn't count on finding anything in our holdings because they're very sporadic, but we do have some. Census returns. Now, census returns are a gold mine of information. They can provide more than just a name and a birth date, but where the person lived, the position in the household, for example, head, wife, grandson, boarder, daughter, domestic, a place of birth, and of course, where they lived, the city or district that they lived in. And things to keep in mind when you're looking up your ancestors in the census. Take all the information that you find with a grain of salt. It's quite common to see discrepancies between censuses. It's a hard word to say. In particular, spelling. Spelling variations are very common. The enumerator, who was most likely Anglo-Saxon or French Canadian, was taking down the information and spelling things as he heard them. So you can imagine, in particular with French names, if it was an Anglo, trying to phonetically write down the names he heard. Also, someone might be answering for a tenant or a relative or a servant. So they may be giving incorrect information, such as birth, the exact day of birth could vary by a few days. It could be anything, the spelling of the name. Sometimes the first name that they are using is actually their second name. So that you have to look at honestly with. I've done a lot of searching in the census, and some of the stuff you come up with, you think, oh my gosh, are these connected? So it's, yeah, you try to find evidence then in some other record to prove that they are connected. And also the geographic areas covered by the census varied significantly over the years. So territories of Indigenous peoples were not always enumerated, and the census didn't cover many Inuit territories until 1941. There are also columns on the census on race and ethnic origin, which can be great hints, but also people might have wanted to hide their true ethnicity. And people often anglicized their names if they were hard to spell or hard to say. If you're in some of the census, you will see for race, you'll see letters, which now this is particularly offensive, but it is what it is on those forms. So you would see W for white, B for black, R for red, which would be Indigenous, and a Y for yellow. So it's even hard to say this, but these are the records of their time. Because of the variations and discrepancies, we recommend that you look at a number of different census, and you have to remember they're 10 years apart, so a lot happens in 10 years. Like the person that was saying, you know, their relative was in one census but not in the other, so why is that? I found, particularly in Indigenous communities that straddle the border between the United States and Canada, that often travel there. They would travel back and forth often. So you, at the time of the census, and the American census were on different years, in different years than the Canadian. So often, if you know that they lived in, like, let's say in the Okanagan, well, there was a Canadian Okanagan and an American Okanagan, and they spelled it a little differently. But there would be a census then for a year other than the Canadian census, and you may find them in a US census, which has happened to me when I was looking for a particular person. So consider that as well. And we also have border crossing documents. So many people traveled across the border when it was easy to do so, and they would spend a few years in the United States and then come back to Canada and vice versa. So that's an avenue as well. You can search the census by choosing whatever year you're looking at and search via Ancestry. You'll see it in the Ancestor search page, all the census. And each census will have its own introductory page explaining that year's census. And you can search by name, you can search by age, district and sub-district, and there's also a keyword area as well. So with that in mind, here are two examples of the Canadian census. The first on the left is the 1901 census for Fort Babine. And you can access this by actually putting Babine in the keyword area of the census. And so this is a return. It's kind of a simple form. Now on the right-hand side, I wanted to see if I could find something in the Yale district, because I know the Yale district has a number of different reserves and a number of different bands. So I tried to put something in that was the band. I tried a band name, I tried a reserve, I tried the agency. Nothing came up. I got no hits from anything. So I just put in the Yale Reserve in the district, and I got over 1,200 hits. And I thought, well, I happen to have time today, so I'm going to see what I find. So at around 500, I noticed something strange in the census, and that they were only giving first names. And I thought, well, that's kind of a weird census. Why would they only give first names? And I thought, well, I'm going to look at the form more closely. And so when you look at this form, you'll see at the top left and the top right, it says, it has the word Indians. So, and then along the border, just down on the right-hand side, if you can read it, it's in very small script, but it says Okanagan, and the other word, now I've forgotten and I can't see it, but it does sort of tell you where it is, but this is a shot in the dark because it won't come up when you put Okanagan. But and I don't know how to solve that, but we do have census material. It's how clever you are in trying to access it. And of course, now that I found this, I can help you. So then we have quite a few other documents that are found not in the genealogy pages, but in our record group number 10. So you would look for these in our collection search function. And the types of documents that you would find names of relatives and ancestors are on the list here. Estate files are brilliant for that. Pay lists are great as well. And we also have agent census books. They're different from the federal census. And you'll see that example on the right-hand side of this slide. So it's really just a list of families and the head of the family and his family underneath. You get an age, and on the opposite page, there may be some annotations on who they married, or if someone in the family died recently. So they're a great resource as well for sort of pinpointing. If you know what area your Indigenous family lived in, we could see if there was a relevant census book. And on the left-hand side is a list of land assignments that contain names and also the census book, yeah. But the problem with these records is that they're not indexed by name. We have uploaded some finding aids that do list estates and enfranchisement records by name, but it's not 100%. We are in the process of still uploading those. So you may not find the name you're looking for. So what we suggest is to start your search with either an agency, a band name, a reserve name, and then the type of document you're looking for, such as estate or enfranchisement. And then you'll get sort of an idea of where these materials are, and we can help you then further as well. So here's an example of an estate file. Most of these have not been digitized because we do need to wait 110 years after birth before we can make something public. So on the left-hand side, let's see, this is the image of correspondence from the Indian superintendent reporting the death of the chief of the Okanagan band. And in this letter, he discusses the selection of a new chief. But most of what you're going to be looking for is on the right-hand side. This is an example of an estate file. Some of them are quite thick if there was property involved. But they're all different. Sometimes they contain a will, sometimes they don't. But most often there is a list of heirs, debts owed, and then of course a list of assets as well. So these can provide a wealth of information on connected family. Band lists. So there's a few different files that are band lists. The records that contain info about individuals and families are membership lists, treaty annuity lists, interest distribution lists, and of course RG10 census records. So in 1951, the federal government created the first national registry of every known individual entitled to Indian status under the Indian Act. This register is currently maintained and in a computerized format by the Indigenous Services Canada. And just to be clear, that this does not apply to non-status First Nation people, citizens of the Métis Nation, or the Inuit. And it's important to know this date because the records that exist are different before and after the register was created. Band membership lists before 1951 are scattered through our RG10 records. They list families and sometimes birth dates. Treaty annuity pay lists and the interest distribution pay lists are really useful for research before 1951. From around 1893 to 1951, the pay lists also contained names of other members of the band, and the government used these pay lists as band membership lists. Now we're going to go to Métis. So we that in our holdings. So In the late 1800s, an enumeration process was undertaken by the federal government to extinguish any land right the Métis Nation may have had as a result of their Indigenous heritage. The scrip was a special certificate issued by the Department of the Interior to individuals that was redeemable for land or money. The claimants had to fill out an application for the scrip, and it is the application and the associated affidavits where you'll find the biographical details about the applicant, such as date, place of birth, names of family members. Many of the scrip records, including applications and affidavits, have been digitized, and they are available on in our RG10 holdings. If your ancestors were citizens of the Métis Nation and lived in Manitoba or parts of Saskatchewan or Alberta, they may have applied for a scrip. So on this slide, you'll see an example of a canceled scrip certificate and the application that goes along with that. Sources for Inuit genealogy. In the 1940s, Inuit were given disc numbers by the Government of Canada. And the main goal of the disc numbers was to administer or distribute family allowance and health care. In 1969, the government of the Northwest Territories started Project Surname to replace the disc numbers and its number names. All Inuit, except those living in Labrador, were given surnames. And registers for the disc numbers and project surname lists are part of our collection as well. And what's useful with these is that you get the names, birth and death information. And just as an aside, these are restricted because of the personal information. It doesn't mean you can't have access to it. Again, you need to submit what we call an access request. And that'll be on our website. You can, 2002, LAC on a project niche is a play. We have a large collection of historic photographs from the North. And before project naming, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people who were depicted in the majority of these photographs were left nameless. Over the past 18 years, project naming has provided a virtual space where Indigenous communities can access LAC's photo collection and identify individuals. So there are so little.
Suzanne, your audio is cutting in and out.
So some
Suzanne,
additional places where
I'll let you know your audio is just cutting in and out a little bit on you there. I'm probably not much you can do about it. Just thought I'd let you know.
That's I'm at home. I don't know if that makes a difference, but you're hearing me now? Is that okay? Okay. So some other things to look at when you're looking for history of your ancestors is while you want to find information on the people themselves, a lot of what you can find can also give you some context from within the time that they existed and what it was like for Indigenous people in the early part of the 19th and 20th centuries. So your library actually has a lot of information, local histories, newspapers, family histories. Now military records would be we actually have extensive military records from the First World War, and there is a on the database that we have.
Well, Suzanne, I think your computer might be telling you you're out of time. I'm not sure. You've been cutting out, and now
on our site.
Just sorry, Suzanne, you've got frozen. Oh, perfect. I was going to say you've frozen there, but I see you've got your contact sheet up, and that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the end, by the way.
Oh, thank you. This has been such a comprehensive resource for everyone. I'll let you leave that up a little bit longer in case someone wants to record an address or email there or phone number. It's great that folks can still call in today's day and age, not have to have a bot or a robot answer them. So if you want to get in touch with Suzanne directly, there's some information there that can help. Also, thank you, Suzanne. We'll get you to stop sharing there. We have just 5 minutes left. If there's any more questions or Q&A, we'll just comment that what's so good about a format like this is you get the hive mind happening. And regarding that record that Rhoda mentioned, that she was looking for her grandfather, found him in the 1911, couldn't find him, couldn't find a death certificate. Someone online said they had luck finding a record. She was looking for an Indigenous ancestor and found a death record in the sealing records. So S-E-A-L-I-N-G. He was a sealer and lost at sea. And so she found many First Nations men were involved in that industry and found some unique records that way. So thank you so much for sharing that. It's great when we learn about new resources ourselves. And I always think it's great when you get a question you don't know the answer to, because then you have to look it up, as that example you gave, Suzanne, when you're looking in Yale and you find something new, and then you're able to answer further questions as we go. If folks are not able to access the Google document, which lists so many resources, but you would like a copy of that, I'm going to volunteer my email. You can email me and I'll send it to you. It's kgough@royalbcmuseum.bc.ca. We've just put it there in the chat window if you want to copy it there, and we'll make sure you get a copy of it. Otherwise, you can get it on the Google Drive, and then you can share that with other friends and family or people you know who are researching. Genevieve and Suzanne, time for last words. Genevieve, shall I come to you? Is there anything you want to share? Any magic last minute advice?
No, just to reiterate, please contact us. You can contact me directly. All of the archivists are listed on our website, or you can contact the generic access inbox, which is access, ACCESS, at royalbcmuseum.bc.ca. So any requests or questions that you have for an archivist or one of the access specialists in the reference room can go through that email box, and we'd be happy to help you with your search. And I hope to see people in the reference room one day in a more normal way. I hope everything gets back to normal eventually.
And you've got my direct phone number, although I'm not in the office every day yet, but the email address at the bottom, the Vancouver email address, is where you can get me directly. And if I'm not there, my colleagues will answer that email address. And if it's a question that deals more with records that are outside of British Columbia, we forward that to our genealogy specialists in Ottawa, and they're really good. So both places, but I can triage it for you. We'll see what we can find for you first. So.
That's awesome. Well, you're both really good. Thank you so much for sharing so much information today, and your experience, I think, will really help some people. So we appreciate it a lot. And thank you everyone who joined us. Again, if you joined late or you missed something and you want to go back, this has been recorded. We will be posting it to the Royal BC Museum's YouTube channel, so please have a look there. The museum has reopened and we are ready to welcome you back. You can find out more on our website about time tickets and exhibits. We are going to be continuing this program at home, also at home kids and at outside for the foreseeable future. And links for all those programs are also posted on our website. Next week, on Tuesday, RBCM at Home will be chatting with staff of the Niska Museum in Northern BC, and we're going to be taking a virtual tour of their site. So I hope you'll join us again. In the meantime, continue to take care of yourselves and one another. Thank you very much for joining. Great, Liz has stopped us on Facebook.